Well, hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Speaking with Confidence with Kat Matson, the show where I coach people who have so much to say, but they struggle with being heard. Oftentimes, chances are if you're listening, you're impact-minded too. You really want to make a positive contribution to your workplace, to your business, to your community, and your words just get in the way. Welcome. If you're a frequent listener, welcome back. It's lovely to have you here. And if you're brand new, if this is your first ever episode, welcome. It's lovely to meet you. Now, before I get into the guts of today's conversation, which is very much how to keep speaking up even when you're over it, I want to let you know about a very special free event that is coming up. My Speaking with Impact 7-day practice series kicks off in just a couple of weeks. In fact, on Monday, the 20th of April, it kicks off. And over 7 days, I will be sharing my top tips, my top tricks, my top ways of collecting your thoughts and landing your message every single time. And yes, you heard right, it's a practice series. These insights drop in a way that you can use what you learn every single day. The series is also supported by 2 live group coaching calls, so you can ask me all of your questions, you can practice in a safe space, and you can really hone in your speaking confidence. It is entirely free to attend. It's kicking off on the 20th of April, and the link to join is in the show notes. So I really can't wait to see you there. But for now, let's get stuck into this conversation. Now, where this particular thought bubble came was I was presenting at a local Government Managers Association conference a few weeks ago. And one of the questions that I asked from stage was, what stops you from speaking up? What stops you? What gets in the way of expressing yourself? And one of the replies just quite literally stopped me in my tracks because I felt it to my core. Her response was, I'm tired. I am tired of always speaking up. I am tired of always having to make the case. I am tired of being dismissed. I'm tired of being accused of being emotional, of being shrill, of not having anything else to say. I'm tired. And as I said, I felt that in my bones. And so, having experienced that at a very, very deep level in my own public sector career, and also experiencing it as a business owner too. In fact, I was just commenting to a friend and colleague this morning, you know what I get tired of? I get tired of having to show up, of constantly having to say the same thing in my model of the world over and over and over again. So I wanted to talk about that today because it's a real thing. It's a real thing. Anyone who is trying to make change, anyone who is marketing their business, anyone who is advocating for their stakeholders, anyone who is in the public sector and I'm going to say banging on tables, figuratively, of course, anyone who is trying to educate people to do things in a different way, it's really easy to get tired. In fact, it's possibly one of the most exhausting things you can do in a professional context. And so I want to talk about how can we both change how we speak so we're perhaps a little bit more impactful, a little bit more effective, and not so exhausted, but also what does it take from a mental bandwidth perspective as well to continue to do what we need to do so that we can keep showing up. So let's deal with the communication pieces first, because after all, this is the Speaking with Impact. No, it's not. What is it? It's the Speaking with Confidence podcast. So the first thing, recognize it's no one's fault. I know when I was frustrated that people weren't listening to me, people weren't paying attention, people weren't doing what it is that I wanted them to do, it was really easy for me to blame them and make them wrong. It's not them. By the same token, it was also not me. Remember that we are all busy. Everyone is focused on their deliverables, their urgencies, their priorities, the competing demands. Most of us these days are dealing with information by fire hose. We're grappling with all the things. We don't have enough time to do the things that we need to do, let alone take on somebody else's thing. And so just as much as we're emphatic about getting our message across, our listeners are emphatic about getting their things done. So it's no one's fault. It's therefore on us as the communicator to think of different ways to be effective. So I love Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of his habits is seek first to understand, then to be understood. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. So when it comes to communicating whatever it is that you're communicating, pause for a moment and ask yourself, well, where is this going to land for my listener? Are they going to accept it with open arms? Is it going to cause extra work for them? Is it going to cause extra drama for them? Is it a hard to understand concept for them, not because they're stupid, but because it's unfamiliar to them? Is this going to take bandwidth? Does this add to their load? Thinking of all of these things and really getting present to what is going on for our listener is a really important first step in not just changing how we say what we say, but perhaps it's also about changing what we say. Perhaps it's pulling back a little bit and saying less, at least in the first instance. Perhaps it's more of a step-by-step journey. When I'm coaching my corporate clients, I will talk about, well, what are the objections our listener is likely to have, and how can I pace those objections out for them, or at least acknowledge that they're going to exist? What are their fears? What is it that I'm saying that might be causing fear, whether it's a big existential fear or whether it's just this is just going to add more to my already busy schedule. Or it could be a more subtle fear. It could be, how is this going to make me look stupid? How is this going to threaten my reputation in the organisation or in my community? Like, people fear stuff, right? Also, what's their current agenda? And I don't mean agenda in the negative sense. It's just, what are their current priorities? And where does what I have to say fit or not fit with that agenda? And ultimately, what do they care about? And how can I adjust what it is that I have to say so I meet them where they're at? So I meet them in a way that connects to what's important to them and manages those fears, those concerns, those issues that they might be experiencing. The other thing to remember is that influence takes time. Often way more time than we want it to take, way more time than we think it's going to take. I remember in my public sector career when I was Brisbane's Chief Digital Officer, I was leading the digital transformation of the city's economy. I know it sounds ridiculously highfalutin. And one of the things that I needed to do was to really demonstrate to the elected officials the value of innovation. And I also needed to get over the line different innovation programs that by very definition didn't have a straight line predictable outcome. And this was an ongoing, it felt to me like a never-ending conversation, because rightly so, in a government scenario where we are spending taxpayers and ratepayers' money, we want a degree of predictability. We want a degree of, well, if we do this, then we will get that. In innovation programming, I can't give that. I can't say, well, if we fund this many or if we support this many startups, we'll produce a unicorn, a $1 billion business. Or if we do this kind of policy, we will generate these results. It's just not how it works. And so as I continued to get frustrated with the lack of understanding and the lack of, I'm going to say understanding of how complicated innovation was, I distinctly remember the day that I had just introduced the Lord Mayor and he had taken the stage. And in his speech, which I had prepared his speech notes for, so I knew this particular phrase was not in his speech notes. But the thing that he said, which made my heart sing, was, as our Chief Digital Officer, Kat Matson, says, innovation is messy. I was like, oh, he's got it. Now I need to say, this was 4 years into the role. He'd heard me speak a lot. A lot. I had been banging on about this a lot. So remembering that the things that are important to us, the change that we're leading, can be years in the making. In fact, as a completely different example, I recently saw on LinkedIn one of the contacts actually who I met during that time when I was Brisbane's Chief Digital Officer. She had just established, she was announcing the opening of an extraordinary fabric recycling facility. It's very much part of the circular economy, and it solves the issue that we have had for so long that when we donate clothes to the charity bins, often there is too much for the charities to do anything with, and so it ends up in landfill. So what do you do with the fabrics, with the fibres that could be pulled apart, that could be reused, that could be repurposed into other things, but at the moment we didn't have the tech to do it? So she recently announced that she'd just done that. She'd just opened the facility. That was 10 years plus in the making. 10 years plus. I first came across her. In fact, I first came across her 12 years ago, and that's what she was talking about then. Now, I say this not to exhaust you even more in terms of, oh my goodness, there's 10 years more in this. There might be, depending on what it is that you're trying to lead change in, what you're trying to influence. But you will rarely change minds in one conversation. You will rarely get people to do what it is that you want them to do if it's different to what they're currently doing in one conversation. And so you do need to be willing to repeat yourself. You need to be willing to show up again and again and again and again and again and again and say what feels to you like the same thing. But oftentimes your audience, they're often only hearing it for the first time, not because they haven't heard you talk about it before, but because they're only just understanding it. They're just seeing it click. So really connecting with what it means to them and how to meet them where they're at is a very, very, very powerful way to influence and to speak so that you're heard. The final thing on the communication piece that I want to talk about is stories. Stories will often be more effective than data. And again, I'm going to go back to my CDO days. One of the things that I found was very useful was hosting breakfasts where the elected officials would come and sit with startup founders that we had supported. And as we went around the table and all of the startup founders introduced themselves and explained what was the problem that they were solving, what they'd invented, what they'd created, what their business did, and how the program had helped them, how our program had helped them, those stories were far more powerful than any report that I could put up through the lines. Because what would happen was that the elected officials could then make sense of what we were doing, and then they could repeat the stories themselves. Now, here's a little piece of magic. When somebody can repeat a story, it's real. When somebody can explain what it is that you've been trying to explain, they get it. But if they can't explain it, if they can't put it into their own words, if they can't pass it on to someone else, well, it's really hard for them to advocate for it, to support it, to justify it, to defend it. So stories, either the case studies, the testimonials, or the imaginary made-up stories you use to illustrate what might happen. You know, you can imagine that in the future we might do this. Stories are far more powerful than perhaps giving all of the data, all the detail, all of the facts and the figures, and all of the research. So that's the communication piece. And I'm hearing you. I can hear that you are exhausted. You're kind of like, yeah, but God, can't I do all of this? I get it. And how do you maintain your energy? How do you maintain your energy and your enthusiasm when it's just, oh gosh, there's another meeting. There's another piece of content. there's another podcast. There's another thing that I have to do yet again to convince people, to come on board with me. Well, beginner's mind is pretty powerful. Remember that it feels like you've been banging the table on the same thing forever because it's your thing. And so you feel like you're repeating yourself over and over again. I mean, this is podcast episode 193 for me of Speaking with Confidence. Ask me how many times I feel like I've spoken about the same thing. But to you listening, it's fresh, right? It's new. And you can't learn less. Even if you're hearing things for the second, third, fourth, even fifth time, there's still a degree of, oh yeah, that's right. Well, the same is true for your listener. So beginner's mind and recognizing that your audience is not in your head. Your audience is not your content expert in the same way that you are. And so always coming back to assuming that this might be the first time they've heard this. The second thing, and this is from lived painful experience, bitching, whinging and moaning doesn't help. In fact, what it does is it perpetuates the us versus them sensation. I've learnt this the hard way. I'm not going to discuss it in detail here on a public podcast, but the times when I have sat in that place of they're trying to keep me down, they're trying to suppress me, they're trying to keep me silent, they don't understand, they're stupid, all that stuff, none of that helps, even if it's true. Even if it's true. So I do not want to dismiss that perhaps that is the case, because we know that life isn't fair, society is structured in certain ways, and sometimes minority voices or different voices aren't heard. But even if it's true, thinking in those ways doesn't help. It just perpetuates the argumentative, defensive, emotional delivery. So instead, what I recommend that you do is that you find your people who get what it is that you're talking about and can continue to lift you up, can continue to top up your soul, can continue to fill your cup. It doesn't necessarily need to be in the same topic, just other impact-minded people like you who are also doing the thing, who are also putting in the effort. And then you can talk to them. You can say, well, what did you do? What's working for you? Oh, yeah, it's taken me a long time as well. Oh, that's a really good technique. It's actually one of the challenges, I think, of modern society and social media, that we get caught in echo chambers of our own beliefs and our own principles, and then we get frustrated when people who aren't from our side take a while to convince of our argument. So rather than bitching and moaning and making other people wrong, working on your own communication style, working on your own influence is a far more powerful way to go about it. The other thing, and this is my final little tidbit for today, because I feel like I've given a lot of tidbits for today and I'd like to make things actionable. Acknowledge even the smallest of wins. Now, I talked about that moment when the Lord Mayor said, as our CDO, Kat Matson, says, innovation is messy. Even the smallest of wins, you need to celebrate. One of the practices that I've now embodied in my day-to-day life is at the end of the day, before I go to bed. In fact, generally what will happen is I'll watch a TV show, I'll jump in the shower, and then after my shower, I will just sit and journal. And I'll just journal 3 to 5 wins or smiles, things that made me smile today. Sometimes those wins will be, I got a podcast out. I had a really good conversation with a client. I made it to the gym. I got a personal best on my bench press, whatever it might be. Doesn't even necessarily need to be on the thing that you're making influence on. The reason this practice is important is because if you are impact-minded, if you are driven to make change, if you're driven to influence, then you are always focusing on progress. You're always focusing on your goal. You're always moving forward. And when it feels like you're bashing your head against a brick wall, it's really useful to see the progress that you are making. to use the brick wall analogy, building change is literally just laying one brick at a time. And it can take a while to see that, okay, there's actually a really nice brick wall here, because you can only lay so many bricks at once. So just taking the time to acknowledge even the smallest of wins can be really powerful. So if you're feeling tired, if one of the reasons why you haven't been speaking up lately, if you've been sitting back and being less visible, if you've been sitting back in meetings and not contributing, if you've been watching online creators thinking, I really should put myself out there more, but not, then I hope this has given you some strategies to reinvigorate your passion for what it is that you do, your desire to get your message out there, and I hope it's given you some really practical frameworks to communicate in a different way so you don't feel like you're bashing your head against a brick wall. Rather, you're changing the conversation, you're changing your community, your workplace, your business, one conversation at a time, whilst also looking after yourself. A reminder that my upcoming Speaking with Impact 7-day practice series is coming up. And yeah, you guessed it, some of those techniques that we talked about will absolutely be explored in that 7-day practice series. So click on the link to make sure that your place is registered, secured, and confirmed, and you'll get all the reminders. If you have a question about today's episode, if you want to continue the conversation, or if you want to share a win with me, then find me on Instagram. Just the link is in the bio, in the show notes. But I'm literally Kat Matson. That's CATMATSON on Instagram, and just DM me and give me a win. Give me a win. Let me know what it is that you kind of achieved this week in terms of your message and making an impact. And my final request, if this podcast has been of value to you, if you found yourself nodding, if there is a technique in here that you're going to use, could you please like, subscribe, rate, comment, or share the podcast, depending on where you're listening. Why? Because all of those little things signal to the algorithm that this is worthy content and that other people just like you would benefit. And that makes my world easier, because I'm on a mission to get more diverse voices contributing to the conversations that matter. Because honestly, that is the only thing that will change the world, one conversation at a time. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to seeing you again next week. And in the meantime, here's to confidence and here's to impact. I'll see you soon.